He had thought his nightmares were nothing but the play of imagination, but the old photographs proved otherwise. They were memories, carried through the blood, and the experiment was not yet over. The Collector's Confession. It had rained since morning, and by evening, Edinburgh looked scrubbed down to bare stone. Streets gleamed under lamplight, glassy drops sliding over antique shop windows, and the air was thick with the smell of wet granite. Inside McGregor's auction house, behind oak doors and ornate columns, bidding was underway for the last lots of the day. David Chambers, owner of a small antique shop on Candlemaker Row, sat in the back row flipping through the catalog. His eye paused on the line, Lot number 48, Collection of Vintage Photographs, owner A. Morris, Laboratory, 1920 to 1930s. The word laboratory snagged in his memory. As a child, he had overheard his grandfather, an avid collector and restorer, speak of strange objects with dark pasts one was better off leaving alone. His grandfather had died when David was a teenager, leaving him the shop and a quiet, solitary life among things that had outlived their owners. The auctioneer lifted a plain cardboard box. Lot number 48, Collection of Early 20th Century Photographs. Condition mixed, he said with dry irony. Prints peeked from under the lid, faded edges, uneven borders, silvering spots of age. But what pierced David was not their condition, but their content. On the top photograph, he saw a place from his childhood nightmares, a stone bridge with a broken railing over black water. Something clenched in his chest, his breath caught, his palms grew damp. He remembered nights waking with a cry, terrified of finding himself on that bridge again. He waited until 2 bidders traded offers, then raised his hand. The sale closed quickly. The box was his. In McGregor's hall, he slipped the find into his briefcase. On the back of the first photograph, in neat pencil, was written A.M. 1926, beside a tiny, almost invisible mark, a spiral turning inward. The symbol felt oddly familiar, though he was sure he had never seen it. Outside, the rain thickened. Chambers turned up his collar and set off for his shop, unaware that he had just carried away the first thread leading to someone else's memories, buried deep in his own blood. That evening, with the shop closed, Chambers set the box of photographs on the counter. The lamp's shade cast a warm pool of light, and within it, the cards lay like little windows into other people's worlds. He studied them one by one. The first, a forest with a narrow stone passage crowned by a moss-covered arch. The foliage looked dense, almost black, and beyond the arch, a path vanished into mist. As a child, he had seen this passage in nightmares, and had always known it led to a place one could never return from. The second, a derelict pier with rotting planks, the water beneath thick green. The photo showed summer, but in his dreams it was always evening, with human-shaped shadows drifting beyond the pier. The third, a hill topped with a solitary wrought iron gazebo. In his nightmares, the wind moaned through its ladderwork, and he would hide behind a column, waiting for someone to ascend the steps. With each new image, his resolve grew. He had to prove to himself these were coincidences, that the nightmares had rational roots. Better that than accept they were another's memories. He decided to verify at least one location. The next day, with a map and an old guidebook, He drove to the hill with the gazebo, about an hour from the city, on the outskirts of a village where houses stood in sparse clusters. The hill was as in the photograph. The gazebo, rusted but still graceful, kept its shape. Chambers climbed the steps and noticed a deep scratch on one column. Looking closer, he saw carved letters, A.M., beside a pattern he recognized at once. His grandfather had taught him, as a boy, to cut such lines into wood with a knife. A ringing filled his ears, his fingers trembled faintly. Through the wind's howl, he seemed to hear the familiar tap of a cane, slow, steady, as on those rare evenings when his grandfather had walked him home along empty streets. He felt the urge to turn and leave, but stubbornness held him. Inside the gazebo it was silent, and yet it seemed someone stood in the shadows, watching. The next day, Chambers returned to the shop with one goal: to learn who A.M. was. He pulled out old city directories, auction catalogs, then searched the National Library of Scotland's online archives. After hours, he found a copy of The Scotsman dated 18 March 1928. Headline: Dr. Morris and Sensational Memory Experiments. Beneath was a faded photograph of a man in his 50s with a piercing gaze and neatly trimmed mustache. Caption: Dr. Alexander Morris, pioneering psychiatrist known for his research into hereditary transmission of memories. Flipping further, Chambers found an August 1924 obituary. With deep sorrow, we announce the passing of Thomas Morris, son of Dr. A. Morris, aged 7. No cause given. The note lodged in his mind like a stone. The main article said Morris had experimented with a group of volunteers, attempting to capture and transmit emotionally charged memories to descendants, using a device he called a mnemoscope, built with empathographic plates coated in a special silver emulsion. The principle drew on Lamarck's disputed theories of inherited acquired traits and ideas about engrams and conditioned reflexes. The method was not fully disclosed, but mentioned visual triggers and associated objects used to implant memories in the next generation. Page after page passed until he found a short piece about a lawsuit against Morris from the C family, initials matching his own surname. The suit was dismissed, and Morris vanished from public view in late 1929. Sorting through the photographs again, Chambers noticed one mount was slightly thicker. Prizing up a corner of card, he drew out a thin, folded envelope. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. On the front was written, Bramble Lane, 14. Below, a second street name was struck through with a single bold line, as if to hide it. David knew the district, on the city's edge, a place tourists rarely saw. He was already picturing the trip there, though his gut tightened with foreboding. The next morning, Chambers went to Bramble Lane. The narrow road stretched between overgrown gardens and old houses whose windows gaped like empty sockets. Number 14 was a two-story stone house, its slate roof dark with age. The wrought iron gate hung by a single hinge, the path to the porch choked with weeds. The door gave way easily. Inside smelled of damp and dust, like an archive untouched for decades. In the hall stood a coat rack with a faded overcoat, and under it a pair of men's shoes, as if the owner had stepped out only for a moment. The rooms were dim. In the first, a study, a massive desk lay strewn with papers. On the walls hung photographs, portraits, landscapes, strange, abstract patterns, like negatives of dreams. In the bottom desk drawer, Chambers found a leather diary embossed AM. The paper held the scent of ink and metal. Entries began in 1925. On one page, in bold, "Memory is a form of surviving loss." Below, in smaller hand, "I refused to accept death as a full stop. If memories can be rewritten, the outcome can be rewritten. Let my son live, if only in another mind." This is not mercy, but necessity. In a corner, under a sheet, stood the device itself. Chambers lifted the cloth to reveal a tripod with a copper ring, inside which a radial array of glass plates was fixed. Wires ran to a Tisdale battery, and an old camera linked through a transduction module. It looked capable of catching and fixing an invisible signal. On a shelf, he found a patient card. Chambers, Edward, 1927. Beneath it lay a photograph of his grandfather standing in this very study. He turned the photo over, and in the glass of a cabinet behind, he thought for a moment he saw the blurred outline of a figure. A heartbeat later, it was only a glint, but the faint scent of ether lingered in the air. He slipped the diary and card into his bag, feeling the story had touched his family far more deeply than he had imagined. That night, Chambers couldn't sleep. Morris's diary lay on the nightstand, radiating a quiet pull. He read the entries again and again until his eyes caught a page headed "Session Protocol Number 14." The text was dry and methodical. 1. Induction. Immerse subject in hypnotic state using sound and light stimulus. 2. Visual trigger. Present key image emotionally potent for the subject. 3. Recording. Fix image on mnemoscope's empathographic plate. 4. Implantation. Transmit recorded image to descendant via an object with family symbolism. At the bottom, in handwriting, cost of process. The stronger the image, the greater the risk of intrusive states in carriers. Effect may intensify with each generation. He set the diary down, and suddenly his mind split open. He was back on the derelict pier. Salt filled his throat. His legs were soaked to the bone. Waves struck the boards in icy bursts. Wind cut his face, and he knew that in another moment someone would touch his shoulder. Out of the fog came a figure in a lab coat. "You're already carrying it," the voice said, soft but ringing in his head like a bell. "You just need to see it through." The vision vanished as abruptly as it began. Chambers looked toward the mnemoscope in the corner. The thought rang clear. What if he could regain his memory of his grandfather? Recall the voice, the gestures, the scent of tobacco and varnish in the workshop. He approached, hand brushing the copper ring. Fingers rested on the power switch. Half a step, and the cycle would start. But he froze. He remembered Morris's words in the diary. The cycle ends when the subject sees themselves from outside. Signed, A.M., spiral beside. Slowly, he withdrew his hand. Chambers went through the photographs again, searching for what he might have missed. At the bottom of the box lay a frame slightly heavier than the rest, its edges sealed with old tape. The glass inside was clouded, as if deliberately smoked from within. He carefully worked a knife under one corner and removed the back. The glass rattled, and a photograph fell into his hands, sharp, black and white, with no signs of age. It showed him, in his modern jacket, briefcase over his shoulder, standing at the edge of an unfamiliar wasteland. He squinted, and saw a detail that chilled him. In the shop window reflection behind him stood a schoolboy from the 1920s, with the same scar on his brow his grandfather had borne and he himself bore. Turning the photograph over, he found an engraved note, a chemical formula for emulsion made with modern reagents, and a date exactly 1 month ago. The shot had been taken recently. Examining the frame further, he found a hidden timer shutter wired to a tiny mechanism. The puzzle clicked into place. The photo had been taken automatically the moment he opened the box in his shop. His fingers trembled as he slid the print into a rigid envelope. The other photographs he left on the counter, fanned out as if watching him. He took out his phone and started the voice recorder. Date. He spoke today's date. Confirmed. The cycle is active. Plan. Locate and destroy carriers. Break the chain. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. He stopped the recording and took a long breath. Ahead lay the place in the photograph, and perhaps the one who, or what, was behind it all. The walk to the wasteland was longer than he'd thought. From the nearest bus stop, Chambers went on foot past rows of warehouses and fences. The place from the photograph greeted him in silence. In the center stood a tripod with a camera. Beneath it, a letter. I began this experiment to save the memory of my son. I thought passing it to descendants would let him live. But memory proved stronger than us and began rewriting those who carried it. I saw how the images warped the living, but I could not destroy them. Any other death is worse than the one that took him. Forgive me. Signed, A.M. Spiral. He stared at the camera, deciding what to do. Option A. He removed the plate, sealed it in a container, cut the power. The camera remained empty. Option B. He left the mechanism untouched, walking away knowing memory was stronger than will. The wind caught a paper tag with the spiral, twisting it around the tripod's leg until the pattern seemed stamped into the air.